think this month is March. We're in March. What a great time. Happy March. We have a guest speaker with us today who is going to talk through one of the newer features in Tableau. It's a good time. So we're going to meet one of my friends and coworkers, Danny, and he's gonna tell us what he's learned about these things. And then, of course, at the end, we'll have typical Q&A sessions. If any of you have a Tableau challenge or question that you're working through, feel free to bring that up in that time. Or if you just want to talk more about dynamic zones, Danny and I will be here hanging out. One of these buttons will let me switch slides. There it is. Here we are, your fearless leaders. Me, Sean Spencer, analytics consultant at Interworks. Kristen is not with us today. She is out. Kent Sloan, Interworker, and Matthew Wellborn from OU Health. So the plan today is we're going to meet Danny and learn a little bit about him and his career and life and his journey into the analytics zone before he tells us about how we get into the dynamic zone. We're going to do a live example. So Danny will pop open Tableau and build one for us before our eyes so that we can take that experience and maybe apply it elsewhere in some of our own works. And then we'll close out with an open Q&A session about anything you like. If you want to ask us more questions about songs from the 70s, that would be ideal, I think. Some things to think about is I think we all really had a great time with the Thunder. And if your organization would be interested in hosting, I think that we would be open to coming to visit. So ask your friends and send us a line. Let us know. I think that could be fun. There is some budget from Tableau in order to facilitate some fun at these events. And there's also, I think that we at Interworks would also be willing to pitch in some kind of from what I've heard lately, we have a higher interest in helping facilitate some of the good times that could be had. As always, I will advertise our open office hours. So if you want to email me, Kent, Matthew, or Kristen, or Danny, as an honorary member of the user group, questions that you have or challenges that you may not want to bring up in the group call and maybe talk about one-on-one, maybe it's too detailed or messy, or you really just need someone to sit down and really spend time looking at a problem with you to make suggestions or help you through a calculation. Happy to do that. One of the things that we have coming up is, so for May, we wanted to do a show and tell talk where we connected you guys, show off some of the work that you've started working on or have completed. If you're building something really cool or doing something that changes the way that people think inside of your organization, we'd love to give you the opportunity and a podium to show that off. In exchange for such bravery, you would be awarded with a considerable amount of swag. So I'll probably be sending out a survey end of month, early next month to ask if anyone would be interested in signing up to take some of those slots. If we have only limited participation, I think that we'll fill the other part of that time with a conference recap. So one of the things coming up May 9th to the 11th is Las Vegas Tableau Conference. If you're going to that, super cool. Great event. I hear it's very fun. Danny, have you been to a conference before?
I went last year.
Oh, what was the coolest thing you saw?
I always mess up their names, but the Data Twins, their tips and tricks was like pretty cool.
Nice.
Also, one of the keynote speakers, I don't remember her name, but she kind of talked about the responsibility around visualizing data and talked a lot about, like the World War II planes that were getting shot down and how the areas most hit were like, those are the planes coming back. That whole fun story that I remember the pithy name of.
A classic data tale.
Yeah. And then I also like the lazy river.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, outside of the hotel.
I'm not sure I think that the 2020 event was largely moved to entirely virtual. I'm not sure what the virtual calendar will look like this year. But if there's a lot of availability for virtual sessions, then maybe we could devise some type of watch party, which could be a good time as well. And then last thing would be September. We're going to do the new feature stock. In November, we haven't quite decided yet. So if you have ideas or topics that you'd like us to do a deep dive on and learn more about, send some suggestions. That'd be cool.
Sean, I can also give it an announcement / plug that you will
Okay.
have to make eventually, but you probably forgot. So like the switch over to Bevy
Oh, right.
is coming, and you can. I'll be the annoying one here. So I'm the leader of the Portland Tableau user group, and we're doing a preparing for Tableau conference session, and we do ours virtually, and we do them at a pretty time zone friendly time. So if you have any interest in signing up for that, if you just go to bevy.tableau.com, eventually all of the Tableau user groups are going to start being shifted that way. I don't know what this Tug's plan is, but just wanted to give that a call out. Sorry if I scared anyone.
Yeah, I'd sent precursors of this in my previous email about this user group. Yes, thank you, Matt. Much better link than what I made. Yeah, largely the only expectation of users is to click and go create a new account, as like the hub that hosts us will be changing. And with that, we will move on to today's host, our friend Danny.
Sweet. Yeah. Thank you guys so much for having me. It's kind of cool to see. So as I mentioned earlier, I host the Portland Tableau user group with a few other friends and colleagues. And it's pretty cool to see just how other groups do it and what other people prioritize and things that I can steal to make my Tug better. So first, this is a picture of me when I was about 5 years old, where my parents introduced me to a goat, and I started crying whenever they tried to take him away. So I spent like 5 hours hanging out with a goat, and then probably 5 days smelling like a goat. A bit about me, just kind of in general, I spent most of my life in Indiana. So I know it's contested whether Oklahoma is Midwestern or not, but I think there's a lot of Midwestern values that I've found in my Oklahoma friends. So I counted as Midwestern. I went to Indiana University first as a psychology and political science major, worked in a cognitive development research lab where I started managing a lot of that data. And I found I liked it and had a knack for it. And then decided to go back to school, still at Indiana, for information systems, and got my master's in that. And if I had to describe myself in 2 words, it would be adventuring nerd. So I like to do a lot of outdoor stuff, as you'll see kind of near the bottom. I like to go skiing. I've done a little bit of mountaineering. I like kayaking, rock climbing. I'm really bad at saying no to things, and people in Portland like doing outdoor things. So I've just kind of stumbled into it. And then I'm a huge nerd who knows things about like Mamma Mia and Bohemian Rhapsody, and love talking about music. I've been with Interworks for almost 5 years now. And before that, I worked a series of odd jobs. I started with Interworks right out of college. So prior to that, I had worked in flower delivery. I had been a CNA for a hospital. I was a dishwasher in Yellowstone, and my most consistent employment was being a musician. So I play around 10 different instruments, usually have more than one around me, but right now I just have my worst, which is the violin, which I can't play well. So don't ask, I'm not going to showcase it. And then a few causes. I like to try to be involved as much in my local community as I can here in Portland. So I'm a member of a community garden nearby. I also help a few local activism groups. Whenever they need help visualizing data, they come to me for help there. And then outside of work stuff, music, I'm a huge reader. I'm a big fan of sci-fi. Kurt Vonnegut is one of my favorite authors, but also read a lot of really boring nonfiction. And then I'm also very new to knitting, and I'll show This is my most recent creation that I'm proud of, a hat that I was able to make myself. So enough about me. Let's dive into what y'all came here to learn about, which is dynamic zones. All right, let's see. I'll go ahead and share my screen. I'll be giving this presentation in Tableau. If it's bad graphic design, blame Tableau, not me, even though it is all my fault. But you can make really good presentations in Tableau. I just, graphic design is not my passion. So we'll talk a little bit about what dynamic zones are, why you should care about them, and how to actually use them. When I first learned about dynamic zones, I was not super excited about them. I didn't really understand what was going on. They seemed like a rebranding of things that Tableau already had. But the more I dove into them, the cooler and more useful they seemed. And the more problems that I've had and had to work around, it seemed to solve. So my goal here is by the end of this, you have some familiarity with how to use dynamic zones. But more importantly, I want to try to accelerate the process that I went through, where it was gradually learning why they were cool and how to use them. So they were released in 2022.3. So I apologize if y'all aren't on the most recent versions, but if you're making your own visualizations, you can always use the most recent version of Tableau and post it to Tableau Public, and this will work seamlessly. So essentially, dynamic zones are dashboard elements, and I like to kind of really call out, it's not just sheets, it's sheets, text, containers, and they're all controlled by a value. So you can make an area appear or disappear based off of a value. And it's important to note that this value it's based off of is going to have to be a global value. So basically a parameter or a field driven by a parameter, which is something we're going to talk about. But these dynamic zones feel very similar to sheet swapping, as well as the show hide container features. But there are some really cool added benefits, and why I would argue that a lot of the time, dynamic zones are going to be better than sheet swapping, and they're going to be better than show hide containers. So I went and tracked down a few examples online that can help showcase some of the cool things that we have. So this is one that I found that I really liked. So it looks like kind of this general executive summary. I have my kind of why is this useful or relevant. And you'll notice these little kind of expand buttons we have on like our total sales, our total orders. And if I click on that, you'll see this area populates, and you can choose close up here. So the big call out here, and why this is kind of different than something like, say, a collapsing container or a show hide button, is each one of these you can click in different areas. Everything is interactive underneath, but they all have the same close button. So this gives us a much better opportunity to, one, I can click on this element and cover it up and have it collapse based off of another element in another place, which may not seem super exciting on its face, but it gives us a lot more opportunity for consistency in our dashboard. So we always know whenever we click on these, we can go to this close button, and we can have more intuitive placement. So when we want to see total profits, we click by total profits, and this will expand. And we can also utilize some of this space a bit more effectively. So from a design aspect, there's a lot of really cool new opportunities that we have. The next one, this is probably the first example I saw of dynamic zones that I thought was really cool. Was right now we have this dynamic zoning drill down. You can click on something like tables, and it'll expand that section. And kind of what's going on in the background is as this expands, we have two sheets, one that is the above sheet and one that's the below. When you click on them, it has a parameter that filters all of this area and makes it show up. Some of the things that are really cool about this is we can actually set the size. Ooh. Sorry about that. We can set the size of this area in the center. So I don't know if any of you have worked with these collapsing containers before or tried to have sheets populate in the view. It's really hard to get them at a fixed size. So we could make it where we have this collapsing capability and we could have like one or two sheets in there. But what we would lose previously was being able to size this middle section and being able to have titles like this. So a seemingly pretty small thing, but it opens up the design to be something that's really pretty next level. The last example I wanted to show was the idea of being able to swap between a light mode and a dark mode. So previously, if you wanted to do this, the best way to do it would probably have been to create two separate dashboards and use this as a navigation button between the two. What's happening now instead is there's this giant sheet in the back that'll change the color. So right now it's white and right now it's black. And then all of these are essentially sheet swapping, where this whole section, this profit versus sales, really all we've changed is the color of the titles. Theoretically, you could make it so that we only had 3 sheets on this. However, the whole light mode, dark mode would make it so that some of these colors wouldn't work quite as well. So those are just a few of the examples that I found of really cool instances of dynamic zones. Before I start to talk a little bit about how we actually implement them, do we have any higher level questions about how dynamic zones work or what they are?
Yeah, I've got a question. Will you have to use the tiled? Is it possible to do this with the tiled view, or do they have to be like fixed in container?
It's possible to do it with tiled. Yeah.
Very nice. Cool.
Yeah, it's any dashboard element. Doesn't matter whether tiled or floating. So yeah, I'm pretty sure this one. So one of the things that's changing here is all of these actual sheets. It's essentially swapping them over each other and they're all collapsing and showing when this is changed. Great question. Ooh. Any other questions? All right. So we're going to dive into how to use dynamic zones. We will not be building an example of this from scratch because it takes a pretty good amount of setup depending on what you're working on. And I just wanted to call out some of the tricks to get ahead of. So we didn't have too many stumbling blocks when y'all try to do this on your own. So the first and foremost thing about dynamic zones is they have to be based on a Boolean value. So it has to be whether it's true or false. And it's always going to be if the value is true, that element, that zone is going to show. If it's false, it's going to hide. And we still get interactivity on the show hide section, which I'll show in a bit. But to set it up, first we need something to actually drive that zone or the dashboard element or elements that we want it to be tied to. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a parameter, but it's going to be easy if it's a parameter, but it can also be driven by a field that's tied to a parameter. And I'll show that in the example that I came up with. But it has to be global. So workbook wide, you can't make it a specific dashboard, but I kind of found a way to get around that in the next example, which I thought would be cool and would love for someone to take and make better. Then you need to add after you've made this parameter or this field that things are going to be tied to, you want to add and design the zone you want. So if we look back on this on the second to last example, once we have the calculation, we kind of want to design it like this. So we know what this intersection is going to be. We'll be able to click on it and select that area. And once we've selected it, you'll see in the layout tab, we have this control visibility using value. So once we've designed it, then we add the actual functionality that says when something is true, I want you to show. When it's false, hide it. And it's going to be, we need to tell Tableau what that actual field or what that variable is. Some of the possible use cases that we've already looked at are that light or dark mode switch is going to be a really cool application of this. Dynamic drill downs like we saw. Having multiple pop-outs. So if you've worked with show hide containers, if you think anytime you want the close to be somewhere different than the show, then dynamic zones will likely be your solution. And then the one I wanted to show that I came up with is a little bit more niche on face value, but hopefully when we start to dive in, you'll see how it could be pretty useful going forward. So in my example, I just used the global superstore that's native to Tableau. And I wanted to create this dashboard. And sorry, it's not as pretty as the other ones, but I was pretty excited about getting this to work. So what I want to do is essentially have these filters, and we could have multiple filters over here that we select, more than just one or two. I have it set up this way so we can kind of see where we're going here. So what I want to happen is anytime that I select a subcategory where the total sales for that subcategory is less than 30,000, I want to pop up a warning that says something like not enough data. One area that I think this could be super relevant is there are a lot of companies that are requiring kind of employee compensation data. And there's a certain threshold that you can get to where that information starts to become personally identifiable. We could use dynamic zones and something like this to make it so that if you have a cohort under 10 people where it's easy to identify, we can use this feature to hide it when it's less than we want. So you can see here, if I choose something like accessories, we have more than 30,000. I'll click apply and it'll show us what we want. But if I were to choose art and choose apply, we can see we have an issue and it covers up everything below. I left the warning example out a little bit so you can see it's not actually hiding everything, but we can start to go in here and switch to choose something that actually meets our criteria. So as far as actually setting this up, there are a few steps that I had to take. First, I had to make it so that this apply button, you'll notice, has a few things going on inside of it. And the reason that I had to make this select a filter an actual sheet rather than something like a regular filter is because I wanted it to target this apply sheet, because I have the sum of sales here in detail, but I also have this subcategory equals category, and I have a subcategory parameter that allows any value. And then on our other sheet, this is just going to be our subcategory on rows and subcategory on text, and I have subcategory hidden. And I have a parameter that drives here to the apply button to say, okay, art is selected. And you can see the sales there show that total sales for art is 27,000. Unlike when I have it deselected, there's should be no filter. I have it leaved on because I just wanted to showcase this. But you can see accessories is accepted, and I have that so when you click away, it stays. But this filtering allows it so that on this apply button, I have a calculation for sales less than 3,000, or sorry, 30,000. Where it just looks at the total sales in this view and asks, is that less than 30,000? The reason I did it this way is in case in a future iteration, if I wanted to add something like a subcategory filter and a region filter, these could both be targeted here, and we could have multiple things that would filter it. Finally, on this view, I have a filter that's a bit complicated, so I wanted to call it out, where I have this parameter that says 0 or 1, and then I have a parameter that says, does the subcategory equal the subcategory? So this is going to be pretty similar to what we had here. The only difference is you'll notice I have this min1 field that gives the value of 1. I've created a parameter action that targets that 0 or 1 parameter. So when I click on it, it changes the value to 1. So it'll show. And when it's 0, then everything will show. So that's some of the kind of trickery going on. Like I said, there's a lot to set this up, but I think the payoff is worth it. Because if we were to have just a collapsing sheet that met this with a filter, we wouldn't be able to interact with what's underneath this. So that's kind of one of the values of when we have this pop-up, it hides what's underneath, but we can go back and start to interact. So it's acting kind of transparent. So to actually show how we do that expanding, so I had to go to the layout tab. I had to select the element. So I dragged this text out here, text object, wrote up everything in there. And then I had to go and select control visibility using value. And then I have a calculation, dynamic zone for warning, which is the one we showed where it either equals, or if it's less than 30,000. Or sorry. Yeah. And you'll notice I only have this one because I'm using that binary field. But when it's true, so I had to set it up in such a way that it typically is going to be true. So if it's over 30,000, true. If it's not, like in the case of fasteners, it'll be false. Sorry, I got that backwards. Right now, that value is true. Otherwise, if I want it to be false, it'll be hidden. So some pretty cool opportunities that we have to start to show and hide things, to start to change between light and dark mode, to use more dynamic drilling down into things. And then we can just start to use our space much more efficiently. So hopefully this was a little bit helpful for you to start to see some of the trickiness of dynamic zones and where you can get tripped up, but also more importantly, how it can be super valuable, how it really opens up our ability to be more creative in Tableau and gets around some of the issues we would see with something like collapsing containers or sheet swapping. So that's all I have for y'all. What questions do you have for me about dynamic zones, how to use them, or obscure 70 rock band music?
Danny, that was great. Thank you. I see Christopher has his hand raised.
Yeah, thank you, Danny. That was a great presentation. It looks fantastic. I guess I'm trying to wrap my head around. So your example made sense. You were looking at one thing of, all right, if it is greater than this, turn it on. If it's less than that, turn it off. In the one example that you had, first off, the very first one that you had, where you were sort of opening like the total sales or total profit, what triggers those windows to open? Are there multiple dynamic zones being opened with each box?
Yeah. So each one of these is going to be its own dynamic zone that's going to be shown. And what I would guess looking at this is if you select any one of these little arrows to expand, they're actually a sheet. And those individual sheets will probably have a value that equals true. So when we select them, it changes a parameter value to say true and something like sales. So this would have true and sales, true and profit, true and orders, true and customers. So those would be the two values for each of them. And then when you select that, this particular zone would be a calculation. It would be driven by a calculation that says, does one parameter equal sales? And does one parameter equal true? And then this close will reset everything to some standard that would change all four zones to be false. Does that help clarify kind of?
Yeah, no, it does a lot. Let me ask, if I may ask just one more question. Is it in a sense similar to like the tool tips where you can hover over and see another window, except instead of just hovering, you're actually opening another window within the same view to see it?
Yeah, I'd say it's a little bit, it's very similar. The main differences there would be, while it is a little trickier to set up, we also have a lot more opportunity to adjust what's inside of that view. So some of these all might have the same, but we could make it where like this orders breakdown is an entirely different visualization or set of visualizations than what we get when we choose total sales.
I'm stoked for dynamic zones. I wish that the work that I got to do used the latest version of Tableau that had it inside of it, because the alternative being sheet swapping is just not nearly as good.
Yeah, that was what really clicked for me here when you could start to select and like, I was like, yeah, I could probably make this where I have some of these things and they're all collapsing, but having the titles and like this kind of divider here was just a game changer.
It's so good. One of the projects I'm working on right now, I've had to set up some pretty obnoxious sheet swapping actions where I have 5 different objects collapsed, and given whatever selection you do, it's meant to expand and collapse these things. You can never get the spacing quite right when you have a container with 5 objects hidden inside of it. I think that's what I'm most stoked on dynamic zones.
Yeah.
Some people will get really hung up on having pixel perfect alignment
And this is where it's kind of nice of like, just to show, like, if I make this not floating, I can adjust how big it is. And then when I change to something that does match, it'll keep that size, but it should be collapsing more than that. But regardless, we have the ability to kind of make these picture perfect how we want them. This one would be a better example to showcase that, but I don't have it downloaded.
Oh, also, yes, good call out, Kent, that this feature is available to you if you're using 2023.1. Or I'm sorry, 2022.3.
2022.3.
Yep. So last year's middle of the year update, 2022.3 is where you would pick up this sweet dynamic zone feature.
Yep.
Cool. Yeah. With that, thank you so much, Danny, for walking us through this and telling us about dynamic zones. If anyone has any other questions at all about Tableau related things, or again, music from the 70s,
Or 80s,
well,
or
yeah,
90s.
or 80s, 90s, whatever time period you prefer.
Just not 2006. Can't help you there.
Yeah. Dark times. Yeah, we'll be hanging around until the end of the hour. So you just feel free to hang out, or we'll see you next time.
Hey, Danny, thank you for your time. Appreciate you coming.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
I picked up my first bass last week, so
Ooh,
pretty excited about that.
Ooh.
what are we working with? What kind of bass?
It's a semi-hollow. It's an Ibanez Art Core, so it's kind of thumpy. You know, it's going to sound a little woody, so I'm excited about that. Yeah, I'm not a pro or anything. I play a little bit of everything, but you know, just enough to. My wife and I run a music studio, so we have like 60 students that we have teachers that teach them and stuff, and so just nice to add it to the repertoire. Yeah,
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think I forget which. I mix up these two bands, and hopefully people will understand why, but it's either Kings of Leon or Imagine Dragons, where it was like they were all just best friends, and the guitarist, the drummer, and the singer were all like super talented at what they did. They just didn't have a bassist, but their other friend was just like, they were like, yeah, you can figure it out. And now
Yeah.
they're just like a super famous band, and the bass player just kind of had to figure it out.
That's awesome. Yeah, I feel like that's a lot of what bass is. Someone the other day was like, I've heard bass isn't that hard to play. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not claiming that it is. I'm just saying I have one now.
I think
can,
it's,
yeah.
It's one of those, like, it's super easy to be okay at, but really hard to be like.
Yeah. I mean, even just positioning on the fretboard is really important, or you get a lot of buzzing, you know, and it's easy to flop around up there, but it's tough to be good. So
One of my
sure.
one of my gigs in college was I had to shave my head and be Flea in a Red Hot Chili Peppers tribute band. And that was the best I've ever been at bass. That was tough.
That's amazing. Oh my gosh.
What
Yeah,
an
definitely
interesting combination of words, Danny.
You didn't know that about me, Sean?
No. Do you have photo evidence of this?
Yeah, I could probably even track down a video if I had to, but I don't know if I can.
Well, you don't have to, but I love that. So if you have an image on hand, I'd love for you to send that to me. I'll put it on my refrigerator next to my other photos that I received of you. Danny set out a delightful
really weird to everyone who
St.
doesn't know
Patrick's
the
Day card.
context.
All right. Well, friends, thank you all for joining. I'm going to close it out. Have a fantastic weekend, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, y'all.